because I'm now approaching 60, and there is a little bit of reflection happening in the work as I look across maybe 30 years and more, really, of practice. I think it's been a kind of rather awkward, tentative, at times not so tentative, look at what it is, first of all, sort of to be human, and involved in all of that has been a kind of ongoing stream of questions that can never be answered. They're not empiric questions, but they're major questions that I look at, and a kind of love of materials that metaphorically and actually kind of state meaning. So the liminal comes in later when because I've looked at value, what value is, for 20 odd years now. The liminal comes in with a kind of sense of knowledge. I mean, I love Dusk and Dawn, and liminality is actually, I think, technically, is when the sun is 6 degrees above and below the horizon. So dawn and dusk, and because I'm one of those people that is much better during the early part of the day than the latter part of the day. I got quite conscious of dawn and dusk, and the kind of change of light, and this kind of fusion between sort of cultural light and natural light, and light for me being knowledge, really, and the connection between light and all the different projects that I initially attempt to grow, and then start to look at how what I've learnt from that makes art, if that makes any sense whatsoever. With a work, I know of certain number of layers of meaning that I'm struggling to express in it. And then as soon as it becomes public, other layers of meaning that I've not been conscious of come into it. So that one of the things I have learned in the last sort of decade or so is when I complete a work, which can often be 2 or 3 years in its processes and evolution, is that I stop and look back and discover other layers of meaning that are embedded in it that I've not been that conscious of. One of the things that's always been very important to me was to make, and it's such a contentious word, but to make things that are kind of beautiful. I don't mean beautiful in terms of sort of a bling beautiful, although there is a beauty in bling, but just something that where I've reached a point in its conceptual development that I know it's right, and that I can't really do anything else but that. And I think that's why the work sometimes does come across as being pleasing to look at. Background really came from, I was at North Staff's Polytechnic doing fine art, and I did sculpture and painting those days. Then I went to Chelsea to do an MA. Then I got given a fellowship at Wolverhampton University. I think it had just become a university, which was a great fellowship for 3 years in the late 70s, where all I had to do was make art. That was the fellowship. Then I sort of finished that kind of prolonged period of being in educational institutes. It's almost 9 years, and I kind of came out of that and thought, okay, what's next? And I've always been very lucky. And while I was in London, a couple of really very well-known curators and critics took up my work really and enjoyed it and saw something in it. And one of them nominated me for the first Fulbright Fellowship in Visual Arts, which I was then interviewed for and got. So suddenly I found myself spending a year in America, 9 months in America, on the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York. And when I was interviewed for the Fulbright, I said what I wanted to do was not be associated, or not associated, but not attached to an education place, which is what a Fulbright normally is, that I just wanted to make work on the streets. And that was because I'd become increasingly interested in work that wasn't in the white box space of a museum or gallery, really, and wanted to test myself and find out how you can make work on the streets, which is what I did in America. It was a hugely important period of time for me. The first piece was a paper tent I made out of consumer durable bags. In Los Angeles, I really liked the shopping bags, so I made a tent out of the shopping bags that could contain all the shopping you ever needed inside the tent, and then pitched it on Westwood Avenue in Los Angeles, and gradually negotiated pitching my tent on people's front lawns. And that negotiation was really important to me, not just the work itself, but the talking with people about art, about what it could do, what it didn't do, about the idea of it possibly being great as a useless thing. I was interested in those times, still am, in the word useless, because I have a sneaky feeling it's a really important word, really. So yes, it was the Fulbright Fellowship was it sort of turned the practice in a direction that I wanted it to go into, and so I don't know how many works. I think I made over 100 works in 9 months. Some of them tiny, some of them fairly major. All of it was just learning and learning and learning.